Good afternoon. What I'd like to do today is address the commentaries of two of the greatest rabbis of the previous generation on Parshas Devarim, Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky really wrote a commentary. A lot of it is a commentary on Rashi called Emes Liyaakov. Rav Moshe Feinstein, he has the sefer called Darash Moshe, which is also a large part of it is a commentary on Rashi. You see that the greatest rabbis of the previous generation, in fact, throughout our history, when they comment on the parasha, they're really commenting on Rashi. That's why it's so important that Rashi is the work that we study every single day in order to come to a deeper understanding of the parasha. So first, I want to look at the very beautiful comments of Rav Moshe Feinstein on the parasha, and then look at the comments of Emes Liyaakov of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. In this case, they're both brilliant and very moving. So first, Rav Moshe Feinstein's comments on the Rashi on the first pasuk of Sefer Devarim. That the pasuk says, "Eila Devarim," these are the words, "Asher diber Moshe al kol Yisrael." Be'ever Ayardain, these are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan, Bamidbar, in the wilderness, Barava, in the plains, Mol Suf, opposite the Suf, which is the Sea of Reeds, Main Paranu Ben Tofel, between Paran and Tofel, V'Lavan V'Chatziros V'Dizahav. We don't even know where these places are, which is why Rashi says that these places are allusion to other places. But we start with the first Rashi on the Parasha, which Moshe Feinstein has a powerful comment on. But first we'll read the Rashi. Rashi writes, Eila hadvarim. These are the words. Lefi shehem divrei tochachot. These are words of rebuke. These are words of rebuke. Umanakan kol mekomot. And it lists here all the places which they caused anger before God. Therefore, he put his words in. He put his words down in illusion. He hid his words. Miskiran beremes. And he only mentions them by hinting, because of the honor of Israel. Moshe did not say his rebuke directly because he wanted to save face for the Jewish people. And we're going to get to that in a moment, because the people he's speaking to are not the ones who sinned. So why didn't he speak to them directly? And then it says, Moshe spoke El Kol Yisrael. Oftentimes in the Torah just says Moshe spoke to Bnei Yisrael. Why does it say here, El Kol Yisrael? Rashi says, had he rebuked only part of them, then those in the marketplace would say, you heard it from the son of Amram. Meaning to say, you heard it from Moses. And he did not respond at all. Meaning to say, you heard it from him and didn't respond at all to what Moshe said. But if we would have been there, we had a response. We could have defended ourselves. Therefore, Moshe gathered all of them together and he said to them, whoever has a response, let him say his response. So that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. So again, what does Rashi say? Rashi is questioning, why does it say Moshe spoke to all of Israel? And Rashi's answer is because if they wanted to forestall somebody from being able to say, oh, you heard it from him and you didn't respond, but if we would have been there, we would have been able to respond. So Rav Moshe Feinstein's question is as follows. He says, Moshe Feinstein asks, why did everybody need to be there? everybody who was there could have transferred the arguments or shared the arguments with everybody else. Why did everybody specifically need to be there? And then he answers this question by also answering another question. Moshe, and this is what you read when we study Parshas Devarim. It's strange because Moshe is rebuking everybody for the sins that they committed. But when is he giving this speech? Right before he dies, at the end of the 40th year. Well, if that's the case, all the people who committed these sins were not the ones were not alive anymore. He's rebuking the people who were the children of the ones who committed the sins. So why is he rebuking them? It's a totally different generation. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu rebuking the wrong people? It's too late. So therefore, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes, this rebuke was given to the second generation in the wilderness who were not involved in all the sins listed here. Even the sin of Pa'or, which occurred in their lifetime. Okay, the sin of Baal Pa'or with the Midianite women, which occurred at the end of their time in the wilderness, it didn't involve any of those who were still living because those people all died. Because it says in the pasuk in chapter 4, verse 4, it says specifically that Moshe Rabbeinu says that God killed everybody who sinned with Baal Peor. And you are the ones who remained alive. So why is Moshe Rabbeinu rebuking the people who didn't sin? He's rebuking the people who didn't sin. What's the context here? So the Gemara also, so Rav Moshe Feinstein also says, why did Moshe Rabbeinu bring up the sins of their fathers, which this generation had nothing to do with? So the answer that Rav Moshe says is, Moshe was warning this generation. See and realize, this is what Rav Moshe Feinstein says, see and realize that your fathers sinned in their matters, despite the fact that they recognized how great Hashem was. They recognized Hashem. They recognized the greatness of God. And so therefore, your fathers who knew how great God was, they still sinned. So don't think for a moment that you're immune to sinning. Do not think that you cannot possibly come to the same sins because of your understanding and greatness. You certainly are susceptible to the same temptations. And so therefore, you might sin as well. That's what Moshe Feinstein is saying. And so therefore, he says that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. He's saying sinning occurs not because somebody's necessarily a bad person, because the Yetzer, some sins happen because a person is a bad person. But most of the sins and most of the times that we who are listening to this sin, because we're trying to be better people, we sin because the Yetzer Hara is so strong. The Yetzer Hara overwhelms us. And so Rav Moshe writes, even a person who's great in Torah and good deeds can stumble into the ugliest of sins. So we have to be very careful to avoid sin. And how do we avoid sin? We constantly study Torah and the Musar and the ethical teachings in order to gain strength to stand up to the Yetzer Hara without a moment of distraction. And so when they pause from Torah study, that's when we become susceptible to sin and we lose our concentration. So we have to be aware of our natural weakness to sin, and then as a result of that, we can safeguard ourselves against sin. So therefore, if some of the people had not attended this speech that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, they might have said, listen, I don't need to be there because I know my own character and I know I'm a good person. I'm not worried about sinning. And so therefore they would assume that they don't have to be especially careful about the Yetzer Hara. So Moshe gathered every single person together. He said, listen, don't think that the people who came before you, who sinned, were bad people. They were good people. They just fell to the tremendous brilliance of the Yetzer Hara. The evil inclination outsmarted them. And so that's why they fell. So therefore, don't think that you are immune from sin. So therefore, you need to strengthen yourselves against this form of sin. And so therefore, even though you didn't sin about Peor, that doesn't mean that you're immune from falling the next time around. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to them. We need everybody here because everybody needs to be on guard that we don't take a step back. It's so easy for all of us, even if we spend 364 days going forward and working and improving ourselves spiritually. It's so easy in just one moment to undo all that work with a mistaken act, a mistaken day, a mistaken hour. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. We all need to be here and hear this message. Let me just pause for a second and see if anybody has any comments. That's the first teaching of Rav Moshe Feinstein. And Rav Moshe Feinstein has another teaching, which I also wanted to share with you, which is also part of a commentary on Rashi. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu says in chapter 1, verse 14, that Moshe Rabbeinu starts the parsha, and he says that when they started out at Sinai, we were told to move on, and before we went into the land, I said to God, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I said to God, I can't judge all these people by myself. There are too many of you, and so I can't do it by myself. And I said, therefore, what we have to do is we have to take people and divide them into judges. And basically, we have a system of bureaucracy that will judge us. And verse 14 says, V'ata'anu, and you responded to me, and you said, Tova davar asher tibartu lasot. The matter which you said to do is very good. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says the people said. So Rashi says, what does Rashi comment on this? Rashi comments, Chalatetem et hadavar. You decided the matter lahana aslem, for your benefit, even though you were being disrespectful. Meaning to say, Moshe says, listen, I need help. It's too hard for me. And they said, okay, good. It's too hard for you. We'll appoint people to help you. But Moshe Rabbeinu says that, Rashi says that they shouldn't have said that was disrespectful. They should have responded, Rabbeinu Moshe, our teacher Moses, from who should we learn? We have an opportunity to learn from you or from your student. Can you imagine if Moshe Rabbeinu came here, the Yeshiva Selling Melech, and says, you can either study from me or you can study from, one of these rabbis. Of course, we should all want to study from Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet here these people are given the opportunity to go before Moshe Rabbeinu or to go before a judge, a lower level judge. Why are they choosing to go before the lower level judge? They should all have said, no, we want to study from you, Moshe Rabbeinu. We don't want a lower person. So they should have said, from whom is it more appropriate to learn, from you, Moses, or from your student? Isn't it better to learn from you because you suffered over the Torah? Where did Moshe Rabbeinu suffer over the Torah? He spent 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking. So therefore, but yadati machshavotechem, I was aware of your thoughts. You were saying to yourselves, Achshav yitmanu aleinu dayanin harbeh. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I know what you were thinking. You were thinking, now we could appoint a lot of judges and maybe we could bribe some of them if it doesn't work to our favor. So they had a sinister thought. But Rav Moshe Feinstein is bothered by, why does it have to say, isn't that better to learn from you, Moshe Rabbeinu, that you suffered over the Torah? Isn't it enough to say? Isn't it better just to learn from Moshe Rabbeinu? Why do we have to emphasize that he suffered over the Torah? That's a very simple, basic question. Again, the question is, Moshe Rabbeinu says he was upset that the people didn't say, we only want to learn from you. They were open to hearing the rulings of other judges and not going straight to Moshe. And Rashi puts into Moshe's mouth that he said that they should have said, we'd rather learn from you, Moshe, because you struggled over the Torah. So when Moshe Feinstein asked the question, it would seem that Rashi should have said that they ought to have preferred Moshe as a teacher because he was the original teacher. He's the one who got it straight from God, as opposed to learning it from Moshe's students, who are just the students. I mean, wouldn't you rather get it from the source, from the primary source, rather than from the secondary source? So that was his question. And he says, why does Rashi mention the fact that Moshe suffered and toiled in his study? And this is where Moshe Feinstein's answer. The answer is that some people who are not yet great scholars might find it easier to learn from a student. You might think, okay, you know what? We'd rather learn from the student. But Rashi wanted to tell us that the best teacher whom one should seek out and emulate is the one who has toiled and suffered in his acquisition of his learning in order to understand every subject with absolute clarity. Meaning to say, you're better off studying from the teacher who's a little less brilliant, but who's worked so hard to gain the understanding that he has. Such a teacher does not depend on his sharp mind or wisdom, despite his greatness, but instead toils and labors constantly to reach the truth. You want to study with a teacher who's always working hard. Despite his having a great mind and memory, he does not trust his initial reactions, but he works and labors to understand the truth. And Moshe Feinstein says this also explains another Rashi, which is said at the beginning of the Chukosai, where Rashi says that if you have not toiled in Torah, it's as though you have not studied at all. And the Gemara says, somebody who claims, I know a lot of Torah, but I didn't have to work so hard, we don't believe such a person. Even a person with the greatest mind was not toiled, but depended on his genius and memory, cannot be considered a Torah scholar, a reliable source of the Torah. The wisdom of the Torah is greater than the wisdom of the human mind, no matter how great that mind may be. Only after a person invests effort and toil does Hashem Yisbarach assist him to understand the words of the Torah. So Moshe Feinstein is saying that's why Rashi has to say that Moshe Rabbeinu toiled over the Torah, because his greatness did not come from the fact that God spoke to him. His greatness, or that he was the smartest person ever, or the greatest insights ever. His greatness came from the fact that nobody toiled as hard as him to achieve understanding of the Torah. And that's our message for us, that if we're working for a Torah study and it doesn't come easy, that's a sign that we're on the right path, that we need to work as hard as possible and it doesn't come easy in order to achieve understanding of the Torah. So this is the teaching of Rav Moshe Feinstein. These are two teachings of Rav Moshe Feinstein on this week's parasha. The first is he's teaching us that we all needed to be there to hear the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu, because some of us might have mistakenly thought that we're not going to sin. And Moshe Rabbeinu is reminding us that everybody is susceptible to sin if we're not constantly working on ourselves spiritually, i.e. through Torah study, through personal improvement, we can, God forbid, fall to sin. And then the second teaching of Rav Moshe Feinstein on our parasha is that the only type of teacher you should study from is a teacher who's always toiling and working hard to study more and more Torah, and who's not relying upon their brilliance and their genius and their wisdom, but recognizes that Torah study is acquired through great toil. Let me pause here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address.